Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Safe and Sound Texas audio excursion. On to another shootout for 2025, and this is a release through Mobile Fidelity, MOFI, and it's the Michael Jackson Off the Wall LP. This is a special one because it was his first collaboration with Quincy Jones, and it was a big hit. But let's hear how this one compares to several others. The magic that was Michael Jackson came through the best after he had met up with Quincy Jones when he was performing in the Broadway musical The Wiz, playing the Scarecrow. And through that collaboration and Michael's activities getting into a bit more of a faster music beat away from pop music, as he was in the Studio 54 genre in the 1977-78 time frame, that made the connection with Quincy one that blended into what became Off the Wall. Now, this particular record had 4 singles from it: Off the Wall, She's Out of My Life, and then the 2 that were really big, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough and Rock With You, which are the first 2 tracks on the album. Now, the album only reached number 3 in the Billboard Top 200, but it did sell over 20 million copies. So it was a big change for Michael from the days when he was with the Jackson 5, when he was fledgling more as the standout guy in a group. And this began the magic that became what then turned into Thriller later. So this album basically laid the foundation, and it certainly is a dynamic sound. You have Quincy Jones producing, and you have Bruce Swedien mixing and engineering this album, and it is pretty powerful. And so that's kind of what we expect from this particular album. And so the album was released in August of 1979, and my comparisons have taken the original mastered by Bernie Grundman and my copies on Columbia Santa Maria, and comparing that with the US CBS half-speed mastered, which came out in 1980, a year later. And then we will look, of course, then how those sound compared to the new Mobile Fidelity One Step on 2 LPs at 45 RPM. Now, obviously, there's price differences between these, and we're going to get into that. I'm also going to talk about some new ratings that I'm bringing into this particular one based on some feedback I've had from my subscribers and commenters. Additionally, I'm going to be bringing in 2 CD entries. The first is going to be an original US that was pressed in Japan, released in 1983, and a EU reissue that I got when I was in Sweden. This was pressed in Austria, and it was released in 1988. So I'll be doing a comparison of 3 LPs and 2 CDs. One caveat that I picked up on this in doing these comparisons is that the early releases of this album had a different version of Rock With You and Get On The Floor, which were modified in subsequent releases. Rock With You specifically had added hand claps in it that were not in the original. So we'll also talk about the fact that there are a couple of these that have that change in them, and a few are the originals that don't have it as well. Suffice to say that it's a great sounding album, it's very powerful, and if any particular version doesn't give it its due, it's going to seem lackluster. And on the flip side, if you give it too much gas, it's going to sound so busy and heavy that you're really not going to enjoy the listen. Because there's a lot of precision here. Bruce Swedien really does great miking and mixing, and there's a lot of instrumentation to pick up on here. So we'll go through the ratings and see what the outcome is. The nature of audio comparisons is that the results presented in this video are fully subjective. They are based on my equipment in my listening room using my hearing capability. Therefore, your results may be different. My effort here is to provide you the relative difference of audio characteristics across various pressings. Let's go through the numbers on the off-the-wall LP. So we have, as I said earlier, we have the U.S. original Bernie Grundman. The pressing is a Columbia Santa Maria one that I have released in '79. You get that one for, on average, a decent VG Plus copy for around $25. The U.S. CBS half-speed mastered you can get for the average sale there's a 66, and then of course the new MOFI 1-Step 2 LP is $125 retail. And so I added a couple of columns here. One is relative decibels or relative dB. And what that basically is, what kind of adjustment needs to be made in order to do volume matching between the different pressings. Do I have to increase the volume? Does it play lower than the baseline? And we use the baseline as the original. So in the case of the CBS half-speed master, it was 3 dB quieter than the original. So I had to boost that a bit to get them at equity, whereas the MOFI was about on par. Didn't have to do anything with that one. So that just gives you an idea of what adjustment I had to make. Another new column over to the right is called Dynamic Range. And this is one that was suggested by someone who made a comment, and I thought it was a really good one. And the reason is imaging and the ability to discreetly get some depth out of the sound and get separation of instruments is definitely different than the dynamic range and how broad that dynamic range is from the bottom to the top and how much punch it has. And you can especially see that when you look at anything that maybe sounds a little bit compressed. So let's go through the numbers. As it relates to these vinyl releases, these three, on the quietness of the vinyl, which doesn't affect the average ratings or anything, it's just an FYI. The original gets an 8, pretty quiet, a little bit of surface noise as you would expect for this old of a record and a mass production. And the CBS half-speed master's a little bit quieter at a 9, and then the MOFI is the quietest, really, really quiet vinyl on that one, so very pleasing on that end of the spectrum. As it relates to the bass and the ability to get that punch, and that's a big issue on this record. It's kind of a dance record. And so as it relates to the bass on that original copy, it's got a very strong 9. Very good impressions and kick drums, and you can feel a lot of it. It's really solid. Whereas on the half-speed mastered from CBS, you in fact lose quite a bit of that. It kind of goes away. This one is actually what I would call thin. And when you realize that this album needs that kind of bottom end, it really does make a difference. Whereas with the MOFI at 9.5, it kicked it up a notch even from the original. Very solid, very precise, and very accurate. So MOFI did a really good job on that end of the spectrum. Related to the mids, we had a 9 coming in from the original, and that was good to hear because the voices also were strong in that area, and it gave us a good centering of the sound related to the overall mix that's put there. Whereas the CBS half-speed master was a little bit less defined in the mids, and some of that was a thinning out, of course, that you hear in that bass to mid range that occurs where the bass was so lacking, and some of that filtered up into the mids, and you really got a little less precision in that area. But again, the MOFI came in at a 9.5 and was strong in that area, representing kind of the best of the best when it came to this in defining all that activity in the mid-range. Now, when we get to the treble again, the original had a 9. I mean, very strong, very precise, very clean without being excessive, which was the problem with the CBS half-speed master. It was over the top, and that's why it got an 11, because it went over the top. 10 is best. When you start going over that, it reduces your overall rating value to the average. because it was just too much. And it was distracting, and in some cases, it wasn't even comfortable to listen to the instrumentation at the top end and the percussion. And so because of that, I couldn't recommend that record because of that right there alone, let alone putting that with the 7 in bass really makes for a bad combination. But again, the MOFI brought the bacon home at a 9.5 rating for that. Now, as it came down to the imaging, we had very good, precise imaging of the depth of the instruments and the separation and all with the original at a 9. It wasn't quite as well imaged with the CBS Half-Speed Master, which isn't surprising given all the other issues. But again, the MOFI came in and took care of all that, cleaned it up, gave it a well-defined sound stage. It presented things in a way where you could pick things up from a depth perception and a separation standpoint, and really hear the clarity and definition that I think was really intended by Quincy Jones and Bruce Swedien. Now, this new category, dynamic range, is how much breadth does it have from the bottom to the top, and how much capability does it have there. A lack of compression is another way of putting it. And the original was very strong here at a 9. Very well represented, a very well lit NAD. In the front there, you'll see my NAD lights. And when you have good dynamic range, the first 2 lights or so will give you kind of the straight dB of it, kind of the mid of it. But when you see it punching, you see that bottom end, and you see that hitting, you're going to see those next 3 lights just light up. And that happened all the time on the MOFI, which it got a 10, and it happened most often, again, maybe not quite as high on the original, but with the US CBS Half-Speed Master, nah. It didn't happen. It was very thin. Even when I cranked it up, it really didn't get past 3 lights at all. So you could tell there, that's a real easy way for me to define that there's some compression and dynamic range lacking in that CBS Half-Speed mastered copy. And finally, on the voices, we had a good strong 9 coming out of the gate for the OG. Again, the CBS Half-Speed Master was lower at an 8. The voices had clarity, but they also were somewhat misaligned almost, I would call it, in the sense of their breath and their ability to give some of that top end echo that you would hear with the others. And I think when you do some compression, that is what happens. Now the MOFI 9.5, really strong on the voices, very present, very close, pulled up towards you, very intimate. She's Out of My Life was really, really a sweet listen for that slow, soft song. That's where your quiet vinyl comes in. That's where the ability to hear the transients in there come in. And it really did a magnanimous job on that. And so you can see in the overall ratings, we got the 9.0 for the original, an 8.0 for the Half-Speed Master, which almost feels generous, and the 9.6 winner for the MOFI One Step. Really did shine in this shootout. Now, we do this cost per rating point thing about, how much does it cost, given the cost of the record, to get each point that it got. And of course, the original at the cost point of a good copy being $25, a really well-maintained copy. You can get them cheaper than that, of course, but I'm going for VG Plus or better. $2.78 for each point. I mean, it's a good value. If you move down to the Half-Speed Master, and it's $8.25 per point that it had to get to that $66 purchase value. Some of the issues with that record are concerning as they relate to especially the high-end treble and the very weak bass. So that one really in my mind, is one that I wouldn't recommend whatsoever. So either you get an original or you go for the best, and that is going to be that about $13 per point score for the $125 MOFI. But you get it all, you get everything you could possibly want in it. And again, if it's a record of your choice and you really like it, that's certainly the one to get if you can't get an OG. So for those of you that have stuck around, this is the bonus section where we're going to talk about a couple of CD entries. One of them is the US OG, the original that came out in 1983. It was pressed in Japan for CBS Sony. And then I picked up in Europe during my travails through Sweden a copy of an EU reissue that was pressed in Austria, released in 1988. Now, these are just $5 kind of CDs, so get a sense of that. But going through the ratings quickly, we got on the relative decibel, these were a bit louder. As a matter of fact, the original was about 2 dB louder than the original LP, and the reissue was way louder, 5 dB louder. It was too much, as you'll see at the other ratings over here. You see they're poked all through with 11s when it comes through the issues of the bass, mid, and treble. Just a real loudness wars, poor dynamic range, really not worth having, to be honest. The other thing I'll mention, though, is on the regular CD, which was the US one that came out in 83 when the CDs first were coming out. This one was very respectable and was very much like the original LP, although the LP had a bit of an edge. In a few areas, a little better bass control, and the treble was a little clearer. But overall, this was a decent sounding disc, ending up with an 8.7 rating. If you're going to get a CD, of course, this is the cheapest way to get this record. But for sure, I'm not going to be buying the SACD, so don't ask about it because I don't plan to do that. I typically will only buy those when they're multi-channel hybrids, where you get stereo on a CD layer and you can play it in your car, and you get multi-channel capabilities on it as well, which this one, of course, is not. So just to show you, the CD is in fine account with the actual record, although I prefer the sound of the record quite a bit. But it really is one that was one of the early ones that I think was done right, while the reissue definitely suffered from the loudness wars. One last interesting item to share is to show what the original CD looked like on the unofficial dynamic range database that's out there, where they give you a range based on an actual analysis of the CD. It even evaluates vinyl as well. But this one was using lossless from a CD and looking at the exact CD that I have. And as you can see, the ratings that it got were fairly good, all in that green area, which is the higher end of the dynamic range. So you can see this is not one of those loudness wars CDs on this original US one. And it also has the benefit, of course, of having those first mixes of Rock With You and Get On The Floor. So this one evaluation shows that, in fact, this is one of the stronger CDs in terms of dynamic range. One thing I do want to note along the lines of the new MOFI packaging, this is the first double LP packaging that I've received. Thriller was a single LP and a little thinner, but now they've gotten away from the box. I noticed in this one, the actual covers, the two they give you for LP1 and LP2, the actual record itself and its particular sleeve is packaged outside of that. And I'm sure this is to alleviate the seam split problem. So it actually is packaged that way and then sealed with the outer seal on this. So MOFI has learned how to do this in a way that is, automatically with the way it's being put together, avoiding that problem right from the factory. Before, you could request, of course, them to open it up and repack it for you outside of the actual cover. But now, with this type of methodology, you don't need to. It's done for you. So, kudos to MOFI for advancing the process, looking at the causes, and trying to finally get away from those dreaded split seams. So this one is one that you've got to look at the cost of the records and decide, what do you want to spend your money on? I would tell you, obviously, an OG in good condition is definitely your best value. But if you want to get everything, and I mean everything out of this recording, the way that Quincy produced it and Bruce Swedien mixed and engineered it, then this MOFI delivers the goods. So as always, thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so by clicking on the bell and picking the all option. A thumbs up or like is also appreciated, as are your comments. So as always, thanks for joining me, and we'll catch you next time on the Safe and Sound Texas Audio Excursion. Take care, everybody.